Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there lived the most beautiful woman in the entire world. Her name was Helen, and she had golden hair that sparkled like sunshine, and eyes as blue as the deepest ocean. But here's the thing about being the most beautiful person in the world. Sometimes it can cause big, big problems. You see, Helen's beauty was so incredible that it made grown-up kings and princes act very silly indeed. They would travel from kingdoms far and wide just to see her smile, and each one thought, "I must marry this wonderful woman." It was like when all the kids in your class want the same special toy, except these were powerful grown-ups with armies and ships and very big feelings. But Helen had already chosen someone to love, a kind king named Menelaus, who ruled a beautiful place called Sparta. Sparta was a strong kingdom where even the children learned to be brave and clever. Menelaus wasn't the most handsome man, and he wasn't the richest, but he made Helen laugh, and he promised to always keep her safe. So they had a lovely wedding with flowers and music and dancing, and everyone in Sparta celebrated for days and days. For a while, everything was peaceful and happy. Helen and Menelaus lived in a beautiful palace with gardens full of roses and fountains that sparkled in the sunlight. They would walk together in the evenings, talking and laughing, while the warm Greek sun painted the sky in colors of orange and pink. Helen would tend to her garden, growing the most beautiful flowers, while Menelaus ruled his kingdom with wisdom and kindness. But far away across the shimmering blue sea, there was another kingdom called Troy. Troy was magnificent. Imagine the biggest, strongest castle you've ever seen, with walls so tall and thick that they seemed to touch the clouds. The city was wealthy and proud, filled with markets selling silk and spices, and palaces decorated with gold and precious stones. In Troy lived a young prince named Paris. Now, Paris was very handsome, the kind of handsome that made people stop and stare when he walked by. He had dark, curly hair and eyes that twinkled like stars, and he was charming in the way that some people just naturally are. But Paris had a problem. He was restless. Even though he lived in the most beautiful city and had everything a prince could want, he felt like something was missing from his life. One day, as Paris was walking along the walls of Troy, looking out at the endless blue sea, he began to daydream. "I wonder what adventures are waiting for me out there," he thought to himself. "I wonder what amazing things I haven't seen yet." The sea breeze ruffled his hair, and he could almost hear the waves calling to him, whispering stories of distant lands and incredible discoveries. Now, here's where our story takes a very interesting turn, because the gods were watching. You see, in those days, the gods lived up on a mountain called Mount Olympus, and they were always getting involved in human affairs, sometimes helping, sometimes causing mischief, and sometimes making things quite complicated indeed. The three most powerful goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, had been having a big argument. It started over something that seems quite silly now. A golden apple. This wasn't just any apple, mind you, but a magical golden apple with words written on it that said, "For the fairest." Each goddess believed she deserved the apple because she was the most beautiful. Hera was the queen of all the gods, married to mighty Zeus himself. She was proud and regal, with flowing robes and a crown that caught the light of the sun. "Surely I am the fairest," she declared, "for I am the queen of heaven itself." Athena was the goddess of wisdom and war, with gray eyes that saw everything and understood even more. She wore armor that gleamed like silver and carried a shield that could reflect truth itself. Beauty without wisdom is meaningless, she said thoughtfully. I should have the apple, for true beauty comes from the mind. But Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, just smiled her mysterious smile. Her hair flowed like liquid gold, and roses bloomed wherever she stepped. My dear sisters, she said sweetly, love is the most powerful force in the universe. Without me, there would be no beauty at all. The three goddesses argued and argued, their voices echoing across Mount Olympus like thunder. The other gods watched nervously, because when these three were upset, extraordinary things tended to happen in the world below. Finally, Zeus himself, the king of all the gods, whose voice could shake mountains, raised his hand for silence. Enough, he boomed, though he was trying very hard not to choose sides, which was quite wise of him, because choosing between his wife and his daughters would have been very tricky indeed. This argument must be settled by someone else. We need a judge who has never seen any of you before, someone who can decide fairly. And that's when all the gods looked down from their cloudy mountain home and spotted young Prince Paris of Troy, standing on his city walls, dreaming of adventure. He was handsome and young, and most importantly, he had never met any of the goddesses before. Perfect, said Zeus with a rumbling laugh. Let the young prince decide. Now, you might think, this sounds like a wonderful honor, to be chosen by the gods themselves to make an important decision, but sometimes, getting exactly what you wish for can lead to the biggest adventures of all, and not always the kind you expect. So, the three goddesses prepared to visit Prince Paris. Each one began planning what she might say to convince him that she deserved the golden apple. And high above in the clouds, the other gods watched with great interest, because they could sense that this decision would change everything. Meanwhile, back in Troy, Paris had no idea that his quiet afternoon of daydreaming was about to turn into the most important moment of his life. He was still standing on the walls, watching the sea and thinking about adventures, when suddenly the air around him began to shimmer and glow. The first thing he noticed was the most beautiful music he had ever heard, like 1,000 birds singing in perfect harmony, mixed with the gentle sound of wind chimes made of silver and gold. Then the air filled with the sweetest perfume, like all the flowers in the world blooming at once. And finally, 3 figures appeared before him, so radiant and magnificent that Paris had to blink several times to make sure he wasn't dreaming. Prince Paris of Troy, said a voice that sounded like music itself. We have come to ask for your help. Paris rubbed his eyes and looked again. There, floating just above the stone walls of his city, were 3 of the most beautiful women he had ever seen. But these weren't ordinary women. There was something magical about them, something that made the very air sparkle and dance around them. The first figure stepped forward. She was tall and stately, wearing robes of deep purple and blue that seemed to contain all the colors of the night sky. On her head sat a crown of silver that caught the light like captured stars. This was Hera, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Young prince, she said with a smile that was both warm and commanding, I am Hera, queen of the gods. We need you to settle a dispute for us. She held up the golden apple, and it gleamed so brightly that Paris had to squint. This apple belongs to whichever of us three is the most beautiful. We want you to decide." Paris's mouth fell open. He had heard stories of the gods, of course. Everyone had. But he had never imagined he would meet them, let alone be asked to judge them. His heart began beating very fast, the way yours might if you were asked to choose the winner of the most important contest in the world. The second goddess glided forward. She was different from Hera, where the queen was regal and commanding. This one radiated calm wisdom. Her gray eyes seemed to see right through him, not in a scary way, but in a way that made him feel understood. Her armor gleamed like moonlight on water, and when she moved, it made no sound at all. "I am Athena," she said, and her voice was like the sound of pages turning in the world's most interesting book, goddess of wisdom and just war. "Before you decide, young prince, think carefully. This choice will affect more than just us." The third goddess stepped, or rather, seemed to float forward, and Paris felt his breath catch in his throat. If Hera was commanding and Athena was wise, then Aphrodite was like looking at the very idea of beauty itself. She moved like flowing water, like dancing flames, like every graceful thing in the world all at once. Roses bloomed in her footsteps, and doves circled overhead, singing the sweetest songs. "And I," she said, her voice like honey in summer rain, "am Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Hello, handsome prince." When she smiled, Paris felt as if the sun had just come out from behind the clouds. Paris stood there on the walls of Troy, looking at these three incredible goddesses, holding a golden apple that somehow had the power to change everything. He was just a young man who had been daydreaming about adventure, and now he was being asked to make a choice that even the king of the gods wouldn't make. I don't know how to choose," he stammered. "Because what do you say when faced with such an impossible decision? You're all so amazing." The three goddesses exchanged glances, and Paris could sense something important passing between them. The kind of look grown-ups give each other when they're about to make a really big decision. "Perhaps," said Hera with a thoughtful expression, "we could help you understand what each choice might mean for you." And that's when things became very interesting indeed, because each goddess began to offer Paris something wonderful in return for choosing her. These weren't just any gifts. These were the kinds of presents that could change a person's entire life. Hera stepped forward first, her purple robes rustling like silk in the wind. "Choose me, young Paris, and I will make you the most powerful ruler in all the world. You will have kingdoms stretching from the mountains to the sea, armies that no one can defeat, and wealth beyond your wildest dreams. Every king will bow before you, and your name will be remembered forever as the greatest leader who ever lived." Paris's eyes widened. He imagined himself sitting on a throne of gold, wearing a crown of jewels, with servants bringing him anything he desired. He pictured vast armies marching under his command, and cities built in his honor. It was the kind of power that most people could only dream about. But before he could answer, Athena stepped forward, her gray eyes twinkling with ancient wisdom. "Power without wisdom is dangerous, young prince. Choose me instead, and I will give you something far more valuable. I will make you the wisest person who ever lived. You will understand the secrets of the universe, solve any problem, and always know the right thing to do. Warriors will seek your advice, Scholars will travel across the world to learn from you, and you will help bring peace and justice wherever you go. Paris felt his mind spinning with possibilities. To be wiser than anyone, to always know the answers, to help people solve their problems and make the world a better place. That sounded wonderful too. He imagined himself surrounded by scrolls and books, discovering amazing new things and helping his people make their lives better. But then Aphrodite laughed, a sound like silver bells mixed with ocean waves, and Paris felt his heart skip a beat. She floated closer, and suddenly the air smelled like the most beautiful garden at sunset. "Oh, my dear sweet prince," she said, her voice warm as summer honey. "Power and wisdom are lovely, but what good are they without love? Choose me, and I will give you something that will make your heart sing with joy every single day. I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. She will love you more than anything, and you will have the greatest love story ever told." Paris felt his breath catch in his throat. He had heard whispers and stories about Helen's incredible beauty, about how men traveled across the world just to glimpse her face. The idea of being loved by someone so wonderful, of having a love story like the ones told by the greatest poets, made his heart race with excitement. But there was something else in Aphrodite's offer that she didn't say out loud, something that hung in the air like a storm cloud on the horizon. Helen was already married to King Menelaus of Sparta. To have her love would mean, well, it would mean some very complicated things indeed. Paris stood there on the walls of Troy, with the three most powerful goddesses in the universe waiting for his answer. The golden apple seemed to grow heavier in his hands, as if it contained all the weight of the choice he had to make. He thought about power and how wonderful it would be to rule great kingdoms and have everyone respect him. He thought about wisdom and how amazing it would feel to always know the right answers and help people solve their problems. And he thought about love, about having the most beautiful woman in the world care for him the way he had always dreamed someone would. The sun was beginning to set over Troy, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The sea beyond sparkled like scattered diamonds. And somewhere in the distance, Paris could hear the sounds of his city. People talking and laughing, children playing, merchants calling out their wares. It was peaceful and familiar, the life he had always known. But he was young, and his heart was full of dreams and longing for something extraordinary. As he looked at each goddess in turn, he realized that this moment would change everything, not just for him, but for everyone he had ever known. The choice he made on that beautiful evening, with the Mediterranean breeze in his hair and the weight of destiny in his hands, would indeed change the world. But that, dear sleepy listener, is a story for tomorrow night, when we'll discover what happened when Prince Paris made his decision, and how that choice would eventually shake the very foundations of two great kingdoms. For now, as you drift off to sleep, imagine the young prince standing on those ancient walls, holding a golden apple that sparkled like captured starlight, while three goddesses waited with infinite patience for an answer that would echo through the ages. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when we least expect them, and sometimes the choices that seem the hardest are the ones that lead us exactly where we need to go. Sleep tight and dream of ancient kingdoms and choices that changed the world. When you fell asleep last night, Prince Paris was standing on the walls of Troy, holding a golden apple and facing the most important decision of his life. 3 beautiful goddesses waited for his answer, each offering him a wonderful gift. Let's see what happened next in our story. Paris closed his eyes and took a deep breath of the sweet evening air. When he opened them again, he looked at each goddess one more time. Hera stood tall and proud, her crown glittering with the promise of power over kingdoms. Athena watched him with those wise gray eyes that seemed to understand everything in the world, and Aphrodite smiled at him with warmth that made his heart feel like it was full of sunshine. "I have made my choice," Paris said quietly, his voice barely louder than the evening breeze. He held up the golden apple, and it caught the last rays of sunlight like a tiny captured sun. "This apple belongs to Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty." The moment he spoke those words, everything changed. Aphrodite's smile grew so bright it seemed to light up the entire sky, and she clapped her hands with delight. Rose petals began falling from nowhere, dancing around Paris like confetti made of silk and perfume. "Oh, my dear prince," she laughed, floating forward to accept the apple. "You have chosen wisely, and I will keep my promise. The love of the most beautiful woman in the world will be yours." But as Aphrodite spoke, Paris noticed that Hera's expression had grown very stern, like a teacher who is quite displeased with a student's answer, and Athena was shaking her head slowly. Her gray eyes filled with something that looked like sadness, mixed with knowing. "You have made your choice, young prince," Hera said, her voice now cold as winter wind. "But know this, by rejecting my gift of power, you have also rejected my protection. The consequences of this decision will follow you and your city." Athena stepped forward, her armor glinting in the fading light, "and by choosing love over wisdom, you have chosen a path that will lead to great sorrow, even as it brings great joy. I cannot protect you from what is to come." With those ominous words, both goddesses began to fade away, leaving only wisps of silver mist where they had stood. But Aphrodite remained more radiant than ever, holding her golden apple and smiling at Paris, with eyes that sparkled like stars reflected in water. "Don't listen to them, sweet prince," she said softly. "Love is the greatest force in the universe, and yours will be a love for the ages. But first, you must go to her." "Go to her?" Paris asked, though his heart was already racing because he knew exactly who she meant. "To Helen of Sparta, of course. She waits for you, though she doesn't know it yet. Take ships, take gifts, and go as a prince seeking friendship with King Menelaus. The rest, well, the rest will happen as it's meant to." And with that, Aphrodite dissolved into golden light that scattered on the wind like dandelion seeds, leaving behind only the sweet scent of roses and the echo of silver laughter. Paris stood alone on the walls of Troy, holding nothing but the memory of what had just happened. But his heart was beating fast with excitement and possibility. Helen of Sparta, the most beautiful woman in the world. And somehow, by the magic of the goddess of love herself, she would come to love him. He rushed back into the palace, his mind spinning with plans. He would need ships, the finest ships Troy could build. He would need gifts worthy of a great king like Menelaus. He would need his best clothes, his most trusted friends, and all the diplomatic skills he could muster. When Paris told his father, King Priam of Troy, about his plan to visit Sparta, he was very careful about what he shared. He explained that he wanted to strengthen the bonds between Troy and the Greek kingdoms. to establish trade relationships and perhaps learn about their customs. He didn't mention the goddesses or the golden apple or Aphrodite's promise. Some stories, he thought, were too magical and complicated for even a wise king to understand. King Priam was pleased with his son's initiative. It shows wisdom and maturity, he said, stroking his long gray beard thoughtfully. To seek friendship with the Greeks. They are powerful, and it's always better to have friends than enemies. Take our finest ships and our best gifts. Show them that Troy values peace and friendship, and so, with his father's blessing and the secret excitement of Aphrodite's promise singing in his heart, Paris prepared for his journey. He chose a small fleet of Troy's most beautiful ships, with sails as white as sea foam and hulls painted in blue and gold. He filled them with treasures, silk fabrics that felt like liquid moonlight, jewelry crafted by Troy's finest artisans, golden cups decorated with scenes of dolphins and sea nymphs, and spices that smelled like distant gardens full of mystery. Meanwhile, far across the sparkling Mediterranean Sea, Helen was going about her peaceful days in Sparta, completely unaware that her life was about to change forever. She spent her mornings tending to her garden. She had a particular talent for growing the most beautiful roses. Her afternoons reading scrolls of poetry and stories, and her evenings walking with Menelaus through the olive groves that surrounded their palace. Helen was content with her life. Menelaus was kind to her. Their kingdom was prosperous and peaceful, and she had everything a queen could want. But sometimes, when she looked out at the horizon where the mountains met the sky, she felt a tiny flutter in her heart. Not sadness exactly, but a sense that somewhere out there, something was waiting for her. On the day that Paris's ships appeared on the horizon, Helen was in her rose garden, humming softly to herself as she watered the flowers. The roses seemed to bloom more beautifully whenever she was near them, as if her very presence brought out their color and fragrance. She was wearing a simple white dress that moved like water when she walked, and her golden hair was braided with small white flowers. A servant came running into the garden, out of breath with excitement. My queen, ships have been spotted approaching our harbor. Beautiful ships with sails of white and gold." Helen looked up from her roses, shading her eyes with her hand to look toward the sea. Even from this distance, she could see that these were not ordinary trading vessels. These ships moved with grace and purpose, and even their sails seemed to catch the light in a special way. "Go tell the king," Helen said to the servant. "We should prepare to welcome our guests properly." King Menelaus was indeed pleased to hear of the approaching ships. Sparta was always happy to receive visitors, especially ones who came with such obvious wealth and ceremony. He ordered the palace servants to prepare guest rooms, arrange for a great feast, and set up the throne room for a formal reception. When Paris's ships entered the harbor, half the city came out to watch. The vessels were truly magnificent, unlike anything the people of Sparta had ever seen. The wood seemed to shine with its own inner light. The bronze fittings gleamed like captured sunlight, and the sailors were dressed in the finest clothes, moving with the precision of men who served a great prince. Paris himself stood at the prow of the lead ship, wearing robes of deep blue silk, embroidered with silver threads that caught the light like water. His dark hair moved in the sea breeze, and his eyes sparkled with excitement and anticipation He looked every inch the handsome prince he was, but there was something else about him too. An energy, a brightness, as if he were lit from within by some wonderful secret. The formal meeting between Paris and Menelaus took place in the great hall of the Spartan palace. It was a magnificent room with high ceilings, supported by columns of white marble, and walls decorated with paintings of heroes and gods. Menelaus sat on his throne, wearing his finest robes and the crown of Sparta, while Helen sat beside him in a chair almost as grand, wearing a dress of soft gold that made her hair look like spun sunlight. When Paris entered the hall, followed by his companions carrying gifts, something magical happened. The moment his eyes met Helen's, both of them felt it. A spark, a recognition, as if they had been waiting their whole lives for this exact moment. It was Aphrodite's magic working, of course, but it felt as natural and inevitable as sunrise. Helen felt her heart skip, then begin beating very fast. This handsome stranger with his twinkling eyes and confident smile made her feel things she had never felt before. Excitement, curiosity, and a warmth that seemed to spread through her entire being, like honey dissolved in sunlight. Paris nearly forgot to breathe. All the stories about Helen's beauty had not prepared him for the reality of her. She was like looking at the dawn itself, like seeing every beautiful thing in the world gathered into one perfect person. But it wasn't just her appearance that took his breath away. It was the way she looked at him, as if she were seeing something in him that even he didn't know was there. "Welcome, Prince Paris of Troy," Menelaus said warmly, completely unaware of the magical moment that had just passed between his wife and his guest. "We are honored to receive you in Sparta. Your reputation for wisdom and diplomacy has reached even our shores." Paris managed to tear his gaze away from Helen, long enough to bow properly to his host. "The honor is mine, great King Menelaus. Troy sends greetings and hopes for lasting friendship between our kingdoms." The next few days passed like a wonderful dream. Paris was the perfect guest, charming, respectful, and genuinely interested in Spartan customs and culture. He brought out gifts that made even the wealthy Spartans gasp with delight. Silk so fine it seemed woven from moonbeams, jewelry that caught the light like captured stars, and perfumes that smelled like gardens in paradise. But the most precious moments for Paris were the times he spent talking with Helen. It began innocently enough, polite conversation at meals, discussions about poetry and music, walks through the palace gardens with Menelaus and other nobles. But gradually, as Aphrodite's magic worked its way through both their hearts, they began finding excuses to spend more time together. Helen showed Paris her rose garden, and he told her stories about the magnificent gardens of Troy, with their fountains and fruit trees, and flowers that bloomed in every color imaginable. She shared her favorite poems with him, and he recited verses from Trojan poets that made her laugh and sigh with pleasure. They discovered they both loved music, and Paris would play his lyre while Helen sang, in a voice so beautiful that even the birds stopped to listen. Menelaus, kind and trusting as always, was pleased to see his wife enjoying their guest's company. He had no reason to suspect anything unusual. After all, Helen was simply being a good hostess, and Paris was clearly a cultured, educated prince who appreciated art and beauty. If they seemed to laugh together frequently, or if their conversations lasted longer than necessary. Well, that just showed how successful this diplomatic visit was becoming. But late at night, when the palace was quiet and everyone else was asleep, Helen would lie awake thinking about Paris. She thought about the way his eyes lit up when he smiled, the gentle way he spoke to servants and children, and the stories he told about his homeland across the sea. For the first time in her life, she found herself wondering what it would be like to see those distant places, to experience adventures beyond the familiar walls of Sparta. And Paris, in his guest chamber overlooking the sea, would stand at his window and think about Helen. He thought about her kindness, her intelligence, the way she moved like music made visible, and the feeling that when he was with her, he was exactly where he belonged in the world. The promise Aphrodite had made was coming true, but it felt so natural, so right, that he almost forgot it was magic at all. As the days passed, both Helen and Paris began to realize that something extraordinary was happening between them. It wasn't just attraction or admiration. It was as if they had found the other half of themselves, the person who made them feel complete and alive in ways they had never imagined possible. But they were both honorable people, and they both understood the complicated situation they were in. Helen was married to a good man who trusted her, and Paris was a guest in that man's house. The feelings growing between them were like a beautiful, dangerous fire, wonderful to experience, but capable of burning down everything around them. The crisis came on an evening when Menelaus had to travel to Crete for urgent business. Another king had died, and diplomatic representatives needed to attend the funeral. He would be gone for at least a week, possibly longer. "I'm sorry to leave during your visit," Menelaus said to Paris as he prepared to depart. "But I know Helen will take excellent care of you. She's the perfect hostess." "Don't worry about us," Paris replied, and if there was something slightly different in his voice, Menelaus was too busy with his preparations to notice. "We'll be fine." And so, for the first time since Paris's arrival, he and Helen found themselves alone together in the palace, with only the servants, who tactfully made themselves scarce, and the weight of their growing feelings for company. That night, they walked together in Helen's rose garden under a sky full of stars. The flowers seemed more fragrant than ever, and the moonlight turned everything silver and magical. They talked for hours about dreams and hopes, about the stories they had loved as children, about what made them laugh and what made them sad. "I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to meet you," Paris said finally, his voice soft with wonder and longing. "I know," Helen whispered back, her heart beating so fast she thought it might burst. "I feel it too. But Paris, what can we do? I'm married to a good man, and you're going to sail away and return to Troy, and I'll never see you again." Paris took her hands in his, and even that simple touch felt like magic. "What if you didn't have to stay here? What if you could come with me, back to Troy? We could be together always, Helen. We could have the kind of love that poets write songs about." Helen's breath caught in her throat. The idea was impossible, scandalous, dangerous, and more tempting than anything she had ever imagined. To leave everything she had known, to sail across the sea to a new land with this wonderful man who made her feel like she was truly alive for the first time. "I can't," she said, but her voice was uncertain. "I can't leave Menelaus. He's been good to me, and he trusts me. And what about my duties here? My people?" But do you love him? Paris asked gently. The way you could love someone who makes your heart sing. The way you could love me. Helen closed her eyes because she knew the answer, and it made everything infinitely more complicated. She cared for Menelaus, respected him, felt grateful to him. But love, real love, the kind that made you willing to change your entire life. That was what she felt for Paris, this prince who had appeared in her life like a character stepped out of her favorite story. The choice is yours, Paris said softly. I won't try to convince you, and I won't pressure you. But know this, if you come with me, I will love you and cherish you for all the days of my life. In Troy, you will be not just a queen, but the most honored and beloved woman in the entire kingdom. Helen opened her eyes and looked at him. This handsome prince who was offering her everything she had ever dreamed of and never dared to ask for. The moonlight caught in his dark hair, and his eyes were full of love and hope and infinite patience. And in that moment, with the scent of roses all around them and the stars bearing witness overhead, Helen of Sparta made the choice that would change the course of history. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but her decision absolutely clear. Yes, I'll come with you. What happened next moved very quickly. Within 2 days, Helen had quietly gathered her most precious belongings, not the crown jewels or royal regalia, but personal things that mattered to her. Her favorite books, a few pieces of jewelry that had been gifts from her mother, and some seeds from her beloved rose garden to plant in her new home. Paris arranged everything with the efficiency of a man who had been planning for this possibility since the moment he first saw her. His ships were reprovisioned, his men were prepared for a swift departure, and messages were sent back to Troy to prepare for their arrival. On the morning they sailed away, Helen stood at the stern of Paris's ship and watched Sparta grow smaller and smaller behind them. For just a moment, she felt a pang of sadness and uncertainty. She was leaving the only home she had ever known, leaving a husband who had never been anything but kind to her, leaving a life of certainty for one of unknown possibilities. But then, Paris came and stood beside her, taking her hand in his, and the uncertainty melted away. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, and for the first time in her life, Helen felt truly, completely free. The journey to Troy took several days, and they were magical days for the young couple. They spent hours talking and laughing, sharing stories and dreams, planning their future together. Paris told Helen about the wonders of Troy, the great walls that protected the city, the markets full of treasures from distant lands, the palace where she would live as his beloved wife. Will your family accept me? Helen asked one evening as they stood together watching the sunset paint the sea in shades of gold and rose. They will love you, Paris said confidently, just as I do. How could they not? You're going to be the most wonderful addition to our family. And he truly believed it. In his happiness and excitement, Paris couldn't imagine that anyone would object to his bringing home the woman he loved. Yes, the circumstances were complicated, but surely once everyone met Helen and saw how perfect they were together, any problems would work themselves out. When the walls of Troy finally appeared on the horizon, Helen gasped with amazement. The city was even more magnificent than Paris had described. Massive stone walls that seemed to reach toward the sky, towers and temples gleaming in the sunlight, and harbors filled with ships from every corner of the known world. It's the most beautiful city I've ever seen, Helen breathed, and Paris's heart swelled with pride and love. They were welcomed into Troy with great ceremony and celebration. King Priam and Queen Hecuba were delighted to see their son return, and they were charmed by the beautiful Helen, who was gracious and kind to everyone she met. A magnificent wedding was held, with feasting and music and dancing that lasted for days. For a while, everything was perfect. Paris and Helen lived in wedded bliss in their beautiful palace chambers. Helen planted her rose seeds in the royal gardens, and they bloomed more magnificently than ever. She learned to speak the Trojan language, made friends with the palace women, and quickly became beloved by the common people of the city for her kindness and beauty. Paris had never been happier. He had the love of the most wonderful woman in the world, the approval of his family, and a life filled with joy and purpose. Sometimes, late at night, he would remember the warnings that Hera and Athena had given him, but they seemed like distant, unimportant things compared to the happiness of his daily life with Helen. But across the sea in Sparta, King Menelaus had returned from his diplomatic mission to find his palace empty of its greatest treasure. When he learned that his wife had sailed away with the Trojan prince, his grief and rage shook the very foundations of his kingdom. Menelaus was not just a man who had lost his wife. He was a king who had been publicly dishonored. In the world of ancient Greece, such an insult could not be ignored or forgiven. He sent messengers to every Greek kingdom, calling upon his allies and fellow kings to help him reclaim what had been taken from him. And because Helen had been so beautiful, and because so many of the Greek kings had once hoped to marry her themselves, they all answered Menelaus's call. They began gathering the greatest army and the largest fleet that had ever been assembled, preparing for a war that would shake the world. But for now, in these last peaceful days before the storm, Helen and Paris lived in their golden bubble of happiness, surrounded by the magnificent walls of Troy, believing that love could conquer anything and that their joy would last forever. Sometimes the most beautiful moments in life come just before everything changes. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin in sunshine and flowers, even when they're destined to become legends, written in fire and tears. And that, dear sleepy listener, is how the calm before the great Trojan War came to an end, and how the most famous love story in all the world began with 3 goddesses, a golden apple, and a choice made by a young prince who believed that love was the greatest adventure of all. Sleep tight and dream of rose gardens and golden cities, of choices that change everything, and of love that burns brighter than the stars themselves.